You're a senior with high blood sugar levels, and you want to know how to lower it without medications or bad diets. That's exactly what we'll cover in this video. Let's first start with exercise. When it comes to exercise prescription, we want to know a few different elements. One is the frequency, how many days per week. Two is the intensity. When it comes to strength training, that is how much weight are you lifting. When it comes to cardio is what is your pulse. Two is when it comes to strength training, volume, how many sets and repetitions. When it comes to cardio, that is the duration. Okay, so these are the elements that we need to know because exercise for diabetes is different than exercise for osteoporosis or high blood pressure or PCOS or something like that. So let's look at it from the perspective of blood sugar reduction. In one study, 62 diabetics were divided into two groups. Group number one did strength training. Group number two, they were the control group. They didn't do anything, no exercise. After 16 weeks of progressive strength training, group number one, the strength training group, lowered their A1C by 1.1% from 8.7 down to 7.6, which is excellent considering no dietary changes were made, no supplements were given, no medications were changed. As a standalone intervention, as a standalone therapy, exercise was this effective. As for cardio, another study found a pretty similar reduction in A1C. Participants who did cardio lowered their A1C by also 1.1%. In this study, it was from 8.9 down to 7.8%. Again, this is on par with the best diabetic medications out there. Now, when it comes to cardio, we also want to know what kind of cardio. Should we do continuous exercise or interval? Continuous means you set the speed or the pace and you maintain that pace for the entire workout. Interval training means you intersperse periods of higher speed or effort with lower speed or effort. So what's superior when it comes to blood sugar levels? In one study, participants were divided into two groups. Group number one did continuous cardio. Group number two did interval training. In both cases, the calories burned were equal. So that means that because of higher intensities, group number two could work for a shorter duration to burn the same amount of calories. So everything else was standardized. So calories were the same between two groups. Therefore, we can't attribute the difference in blood sugar levels at the end to calories. So what happened? The interval group far outperformed the continuous group. The continuous group dropped their A1C from 9.7 to 9.4. Not that much. Especially disappointing considering that they were spending hours per week doing cardio. However, the interval group lowered their A1C from 9.6 to 8.7, a 0.9 millimole per liter drop with interval training only. Again, no strength training, no dietary changes, no changes in medications or supplements. Cardio alone, interval training alone, dropped their A1C by 0.9%, which is extremely good. So that answers the question of continuous or interval training. Interval training is clearly the winner, but we're still missing a lot of details, like the frequency, how many days per week, or the intensity, how hard should it be? So when it comes to frequency, with high intensity cardio, most studies show an A1C reduction of around 1% with only 3 days per week. Quite powerful. One study even tried to answer the dream question of how little can I exercise and still see improvements in my blood sugar. They had participants exercising for as little as 12 to 40 minutes per week, and still that reduced their A1C as much as 0.9% over 16 weeks. Now, with this little amount of exercise, why were the effects so large? The effects were so large because people here were exercising at extremely high intensity. They were doing more than 90% of their maximal heart rate. Now, if you're wondering, what's their maximal heart rate? The maximal heart rate is 220 minus your age. So if hypothetically you, the viewer, are 60 years old, 220 minus 60 is 160. So you take 90% of 160 and you end up with 146. That's beats per minute. So they were exercising with intervals of over 90%. How many intervals were they doing? They would do between 8 and 14 intervals. The duration was between 30 and 60 seconds. So there is our exercise prescription for interval training for blood sugar reductions. Again, the frequency, 3 days per week. Intensity, high, ideally over 85%. Interval duration is between 30 and 60 seconds. Number of intervals is between 8 and 15. And if you're wondering, what specifically should I do? What activity? And that part doesn't matter. Whether you run, you walk on an incline, you swim, you cycle, you row, you go on elliptical, doesn't matter. The mode itself doesn't matter. The other things that matter are the frequency, the intensity, and the duration. Next, let's switch over to strength training. We know that it works, but are all strength training methods created equal, or are there different ways to strength train? Yes, absolutely, there are different ways to strength train, and there's a right way to strength train for blood sugar reduction or possibly even normalization. So what is the right way? A very robust meta-analysis looked at different studies relative to each other that use different intensities from as little as 40% intensity all the way up to maximal intensity. It appears that at intensities below 60% of your max, blood sugar reductions are negligible, only 0.0 to 0.3%, which means light weights just don't work. Now, the studies that used an intensity between 60 and 80% of a person's maximum showed the greatest reductions, and the studies that used over 80% also didn't show significant reductions. So there is our sweet spot. Now, if you're wondering, what is 60 to 80%? How do I know if I'm in that range? Well, there is the lab way, and then there is the real world way. In a lab, what they would do is they would have you perform an exercise and figure out what is your 1 repetition maximum. So they would put a light weight and then you do that exercise for a few times. They would make the weight heavier. You do it fewer times because you can't do as many. They would make it even heavier until you could only do a single repetition, and that is the laboratory way of figuring out what's your 100% and therefore what's your 60 to 80%. For most people, this is not a worthwhile test. The risk is way too high, the reward is not high enough. And so what's the real world way of figuring this out? It's very simple. You should find a weight that you can do between 10 and 15 times. If you can do it 16 times, that's too light. If you can't do it even 10 times, that's too heavy. And so at the end of the set, you should ask yourself, how many more repetitions do I think I could have done? The answer should be probably 1 more. If you think you could have done 2 or 3 more, it's too light. So now we know the number of reps and the amount of weight. The amount of weight should be enough so that you're challenged at the end. I can't say a specific number because A, it varies person to person, and B, it varies muscle to muscle. Now we need to know the frequency. How many days per week is optimal? Studies where strength training is done 3 times per week show greater blood sugar reductions compared to studies of less than that. There aren't many studies beyond 3 times per week. So as it stands right now with the current state of the science, 3 times per week is superior. 3 times per week shows drops in A1C of between 1.1 and 1.3%, which is far superior to strength training twice per week, which only shows reductions in A1C of about 0.3, 0.4%. What about the number of sets? We know the frequency, we know the weight, we know the reps. How many sets should you do? The studies that use only 1 or 2 sets don't really show much improvement in blood sugar levels as measured by A1C. However, the studies using 3 or more sets show the greatest reductions in A1C of about 1.1 to 1.3%. So the final question we need to answer is, what's superior? Is it full body workouts or body part splits, where, for example, one day you just do your chest and back, the next day you do your legs and abs, and so on? Well, full body workouts are far superior to body part splits. Why? Because only the muscles exercised become insulin sensitive, which means, let's say you have a chest and back day, well, your chest and back become insulin sensitive for the next 2 or 3 days, but they're insulin resistant for the next 4 or 5 days. Whereas if you're doing full body workouts, you're insulin sensitive pretty much all the time if you're doing it 3 times per week. So there is our exercise prescription for strength training. To recap, again, frequency, 3 days per week. Number of sets, 3 sets or more. Number of repetitions, 10 to 15 reps. And how much weight should you use? Enough to reach close to or muscular failure within 10 to 15 repetitions. Now, if all this is too confusing for you and you're not really sure how to put it all together, we have a special program that incorporates cardio, strength training, and nutrition for diabetics, as well as for people who are insulin resistant. If you click on the link in the description below, that'll take you to our homepage where you can fill out an application form that shows you how you can work with us. All this application form does is it's no obligation, no sales pressure, no hardcore pitch. All it is just to help us understand what's your situation and can we help you get there. Next, let's talk about nutrition. Largely, nutrition when it comes to diabetes, the most talked about element is actually not that significant, which is all about carbs, which makes me wonder, why do we talk about something relatively insignificant when 2 even more significant things are rarely talked about? So if you're wondering, what's more significant than carbs? Well, the number 1 factor, the most impactful factor when it comes to blood sugar reductions is actually good old boring calories. In different studies where calories are normalized in overweight diabetics, they lower their A1C as much as 4%. Carbs can't do that. The second most impactful factor is total fiber. A person who is not a diabetic requires between about 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. A person who is a diabetic requires more fiber, between 17 and 20 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. Now, by how much can fiber optimization improve your A1C? By as much as 2.5%, which is better than any medication out there. The least important factor is actually carbs. The difference between a low carb and a high carb diet of the same calories is only about 0.5%, not a heck of a lot. Now, if you're wondering about glycemic index, glycemic load, etc., those are non-factors. There is no difference to your A1C between a high glycemic index and a low glycemic index diet. So, assuming they're the same calories. So the two biggest factors, again, are just total calories and total fiber. Everything else is either a non-factor or not a huge factor. Yes, protein is important for indirect reasons. It helps you eat less calories, but not because protein directly influences your blood sugar levels. The only two factors, again, are calories and fiber. If you like this information, I have a newsletter with plenty more information just like this about diabetes, PCOS, high blood pressure, cholesterol, fatty liver, and so on. If you click on the other link in the description below, that'll take you to a page where you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you always have the option of unsubscribing. In addition to exercise and nutrition, there are also 4 supplements that are super underrated and can help you lower your A1C by 1% or more without any changes in exercise and nutrition. If you want to know what those are, click on the link in the description below as well as on your page right now.